Hey, Podcast Aquanauts, it's your host, Casey, here again. You know, in a lot of ways, the aquarium is like a city, and just as with any community, no one person plays a more important role than the others. To borrow a turn of phrase, it takes a village to make the aquarium such a special place. Our team includes far, far more people than just the attentive experts who tend to the needs of the animals you love to visit. There are plumbers and electricians who literally keep the lights on and the water running. Our visitor services associates and volunteers guide you on your journey, and our team of educators offer fun, engaging programs to enhance your visit. The list goes on, from graphic designers and Navy specialists to security staff and housekeepers. And yes, we even have podcasters. In this week's episode, I want to shine a light on two of my coworkers whose handiwork you probably appreciate without even realizing it. When most people think of the aquarium, they probably think of animals like the otters, penguins, alligators, or sharks. Unless they're really paying attention, they're probably not keen into the plants. And I think that's a shame. Far more than just leafy set dressing, the live vegetation we incorporate into our galleries plays an integral role in making our exhibits feel like windows into another world. Whether that's a stream burbling its way through the highlands of southern Appalachia, the lush shoreline of the Amazon rainforest, or the teeming wilds of Borneo and eastern Madagascar. Look, I'm no plant expert myself, but I know that most plants need light to thrive. And in this episode, I want to shine a bright spotlight on our pair of full-time horticulturists and explain why, on your next visit, you should literally stop and smell the roses. Anyway, let's make like a tree and, well, start the podcast, I guess. Austin Prater. And you're our lead horticulturist or senior horticulturist?
Senior.
Senior, because you're older.
Absolutely.
All right. And
it's age related.
and Jenna Paler. Jenna, you are recently raised to the level of horticulturist. Well, not raised. You moved into the role of horticulturist.
Correct.
And is your title horticulturist or horticulturist 2?
Horticulturist 2.
All right. So better than horticulturist 1. All right.
Yes, but not as good as senior horticulturist.
We all know the pecking order here now, then. All right. So what exactly is a horticulturist, which is a word that I'm probably going to have trouble saying repeatedly in the course of this episode?
I do the same thing regularly. I try to add an extra L-I-S probably in there and make it horticulturalist, but it's not.
Horticulturist.
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 Yeah. We are scientists who love to grow plants. And that can mean not necessarily agriculture, so not necessarily just focused on food production or crop production or turf production, but generally more landscaping, flower. It can also involve some food production, which we do for the animals we help take care of, but everything that has to do with growing plants.
You're plant people.
We're plant people.
So how did you get into horticulture then? That's something that, were you just avid gardeners, or did you like growing plants growing up? And Jenna, let's start with you this time.
I think growing up, I liked to be outside more than I did inside. And when I got to, an age where I was working, so like 15, probably going into high school, I worked a lot inside at restaurants and hotels, and I would always try to have the windows open. If there were like plants in the building, like I worked at a Mexican restaurant that had a huge bird of paradise by the front door, and immediately it was my task to take care of that. So it took me doing a lot of things I didn't like to realize that this is what I wanted to do, and like this was my passion.
And then you went to school for it?
Yes. I have an associate's degree from a technical college in Wisconsin.
In Wisconsin. I knew that you came from up north.
Yes.
A lot of culture shock down here moving to Chattanooga?
Especially with plants. Plants are a lot different down here.
Yeah. So there's, I guess, people think of the plants that can grow. I guess it's the hardiness zone. Is that right?
Correct.
So I guess different hardiness zone here than up in Wisconsin.
Yeah, Wisconsin. And it changes. It's been changing every few years. I think Wisconsin was like 3, and then here it's 7.
All right, and so give people some perspective on that. So if we're a 7 and Wisconsin's a 3, like what does that mean? 7 is hotter, I'm guessing.
Right, and like it's also like the minimum. I think it's the minimum and the highest temperatures is like a threshold between that. So like At a zone 3, you're reaching temperatures in like negative 30s, negative 20s. I don't know what exactly the numbers are, but I know it's, very cold.
There's no flowering dogwoods that can grow in Wisconsin.
No. And redbud. Too. I actually had a project in college where we were trying to grow redbuds. And I was so proud to have gotten the seeds to germinate. And since moving here, they're weeds. And I, pull them up like crazy.
One man's trash, another man's redbud. Austin, what was your entree into horticulture?
Oh, so I've been into plants since I was a kid. I remember my grandmother buying my first plant. It was a crepe myrtle when I was probably 6 or 7. My dad always took me out hiking, and we would go out looking for wildflowers. We would garden. I had a room full of houseplants by the time I was 12 or 13, and started doing landscaping when I was about 12 or 13, and also volunteering at a local native plant nursery. And so I just always knew I wanted to do something with plants or animals, and ended up liking plants more than the animals. And so ended up going and getting a bachelor's degree in biology. There aren't really a lot of places you can get a bachelor's degree in botany anymore. You can do horticulture, but I knew I wanted to do something with plants or animals, and then worked in landscaping for a while and went back and got my master's in environmental science. And so I've always either worked with or studied plants.
So why did plants win out then over animals? What's the appeal?
They're less messy, even though you're dirty. You don't have to clean up after them in the same way as you do animals. You also don't usually have to be afraid of them. And I guess there's also something different about taking care of an animal that's alive. It just seems to be a slightly different entity. Plants can die back a little bit, or they can spread and pup and produce offspring in different ways than animals can. So I feel like with animals, it's a lot easier to mess up or lose one or have something, detrimental happen to that animal, and it be a big problem to take care of. But with plants, they're so versatile, they're so tough. It's just a little bit easier, and I also I think I found them more interesting.
Kind of lower stakes.
Lower stakes, also just super interesting. There's more variety than almost any other animal. Insects are super varied, but other than insects, I don't know that there's the variety in the animal kingdom like there are with plants.
Well, and as we're likely to discuss in the course of this conversation, there's a lot of overlap between plants and animals. I mean, just naturally, obviously, plants are food for a lot of different animals, and there is surprising overlap even here, which is why we're even having this conversation, because people, now that we've kind of covered the basics of what horticulture is, now everyone knows that you are plant people, as we discussed. They might be wondering, but what does that have to do with an aquarium? So what's your elevator pitch for why your role makes sense at the Tennessee Aquarium? And then whoever wants to take this, go for it.
We're creating environments that help provide habitat, help showcase the animals that we care for and that we house, and at the same time are bringing people in to see as natural an environment as we can show them, so that when they look in, it's like a snapshot of whatever region, whatever area that these animals came from. And it's providing that pleasurable experience, that enjoyable experience, but at the same time, it's creating a more natural and healthy environment for the animals that live there. So they're happier, they're healthier, they're more relaxed. And so to me, having actual live plants in as many exhibits as we can is the best way to treat or take care of these animals. And at the same time, it's the most appealing as a guest to see.
Jen, anything to add to that?
I was going to go along with the same thing, like especially in the River Journey building, like the Co-Forest is a great example. We're pretty much just trying to mimic what you're going to see if you go on a hike near here.
So the Cove Forest would be, if you've never been to the aquarium, that's where our North American river otters are, as well as I think an eastern black rat snake and milk snake. And a milk snake. So yeah, so that would be the first, it's literally the first gallery that you go into. It's one of our living forest galleries.
I feel like I did a good job if it looks like I wasn't even there. Like, it's just outside. It looks like it's outside. Looks like it just happened on its own. And that's what I feel like we try to recreate a lot.
That exhibit has always had a really special place for me. It's the first, like I said, it's the first exhibit that you see when you come into the aquarium. And for a long time, until 2005, we only had one building. So the River Journey building was the aquarium. And it was, so literally you could not start your aquarium experience without having walked through that gallery. And I remember being 7 years old and visiting the aquarium for the first time when it opened in 1992 and feeling exactly what you said, that it felt like the weekends that I spent with my parents in the Smoky Mountains, which is, yeah, I mean, if like you said, I like how you put that, because if you've done your job right, you don't feel like you're in an aquarium anymore. You feel like you're
outside
in that space. And that's a really special thing. I was thinking about this earlier, that I think maybe it's just me, that I feel like if people furrow their brows over the fact that an aquarium has a horticulturist, I don't know that would necessarily be the case if someone were talking about doing horticulture at, say, a zoo. That's something that for some reason, those two things seem like they go more hand in hand or hand in paw, maybe, than that was terrible.
That was good.
There are gonna be a lot of terrible puns in this episode, I'm sure.
I'm a fan.
Anyway, so yeah, I think there's a disconnect, because I don't think that same confusion would happen if we were talking about doing horticulture at a zoo.
Yeah, absolutely. And zoos also are slightly different in that their horticulturists spend a lot of their time and energy just growing plants for browse for large animals.
So food.
And we do spend quite a bit of time doing that for our animals as well, but more of our time is spent with exhibits. And we have a lot of exhibits and a lot of plants to be able to take care of. But as Jenna said, if we're doing our job, you're noticing that it's a pleasing exhibit and you're enjoying the animals, and maybe some flowers stand out. Some plants, for a plant person like me, I would come in and look at the plants. But for the average person coming through, they're appreciating and enjoying the exhibit and the animals.
When you're walking through the Cove Forest, so the Appalachian Cove Forest Gallery that you were talking about, Jenna, yeah, I think if it just sort of disappears into the background, I think you like you said, you've done the job right. But there are times of year in that gallery in particular, because it is allowed to experience natural seasonality. You can go in and you will be able to see all the leaves on those trees changing color. And it really, it's moments like that when I think your work actually finally gets a chance to kind of stand out a little bit. And I love that for both of you, but also for guests who come in and they get a chance to see the rhododendrons blooming, or they see the leaves on the trees whose species I can't quite remember, changing color and being just as dramatic as the hillsides and ridges and mountains around Chattanooga.
It's a pretty special place. That is one of my favorite exhibits as well. I'm a native plant person, Southeast U.S. native plant person, and I don't know of another indoor space that has that type of forest growing in it. I'm sure there are places that grow native plants, but that is a large indoor Appalachian forest that we try as best we can to mimic a true Appalachian Cove forest. And it is part of what makes that so special is the seasonality it experiences. The water in there can freeze. Waterfalls freeze in the wintertime.
We used to get snow in there, actually.
And then in the summer it could be 95 or 100 degrees. So you get every season in there, and it's really incredible to have that experience indoors at an aquarium.
and it's also good for the animals. So the river otters experience you mentioned, Jenna, that we are in a hardiness zone of 7. And river otters are found all the way up into Canada. So they naturally they experience very, very wide ranges of temperature. So when Austin says that it hits 100, you might think, oh my gosh. But the same is true for the river otters that are out in our backyard in southern Appalachia. And if in the winter when it freezes, as it did this year when it hit the teens and I think even below 0, there were definitely icicles on the underside of some of the logs in there. And the river otters were just fine, swimming in the water, happy as could be, because that's what they would have experienced out in nature. So there is, as I mentioned earlier, more of an overlap between the work you're doing and animal care and well-being that I think people who maybe are just thinking at it at like a surface level or never really considered the work of a horticulturist and how it maybe impacts animal care.
Absolutely. Jenna spent the morning planting a small exhibit in our turtle nursery.
That was really fun.
Which one was this?
It was a Ryukyu leaf turtle, I believe. It's a new baby turtle that we have in the turtle nursery. And we wanted to give it a relatively natural looking environment that would help it to feel comfortable there. And so Jenna worked on getting some plants and planting that this morning.
And he's got his own little fairy garden now, is what it looks like. It's got all the moss and the little flowers and pieces of wood. So
sounds like a nice way to spend your morning.
It was a very nice way to spend my morning.
And this is just a temporary exhibit. This is a turtle nursery where we bring in baby turtles, raise them up, and even in these exhibits, it may be here a year, it may be here 2 years, it may grow up faster than that. We're still introducing plants. We're still trying to give these baby turtles a natural environment for them to live in. And it, at the same time, makes it more pleasing for guests as they're coming through. Otherwise, it would just be a tub with a turtle in it. But you can make that better.
Yeah, the more that it can look like that natural habitat, the better everyone's going to feel, animals and people.
Absolutely.
And taking along with that too, like Austin's saying, that we're making the animals feel comfortable. I think for people too, seeing plants and exhibits, and we're talking about the co-forest that you're immersed in, you're walking through it. We're invoking that feeling with people too, because we interact with plants.
I wanted to talk a little bit about the process you go through, the two of you, to actually make that happen. So you mentioned trying to make the exhibits look as real as possible. How do you do that? What decisions do you have to make? Who do you talk to? Where do you look for plants? What research do you do? Can
I just say that I think Austin is very good at it, and with his background, which he can talk about, he literally, his job was to hike and look for plants. So you're immersed in looking at everything that is natural and, out there locally, and then you get to come here and replicate it. That's why he's so good at what he does.
Austin, with that wonderful compliment just lingering in the air, how do you do it then?
I guess so. That's funny. I was going to say the same thing about Jenna, but
no,
for a different reason. Well, so here's what I would say.
On this episode of the Mutual Admiration Society, we talk about plants.
I know and love the plants really well, and the plants are only a component. I mean, we've got soils, we've got rock, we've got wood, you've got leaves. There's all kinds of components within a forest, and there's more than that. And so it's not just putting a plant in. And it's also trying to get that plant in the right area, the right location, the right habitat type. How close is it to water? Can it grow on top of a rock, beside a rock, on a log? And so I can start bringing these things together, these supplies based on my knowledge, but arranging them in a natural looking way, I think takes some knowledge of how those things would look in a natural setting, and a good eye for seeing that. And that's where I think I have some knowledge and experience of seeing things in natural environments, but Jenna has a really good eye for what looks good.
Thank you.
And it's different than my eye
So it's like aesthetics and experience.
Yes. And I'm not saying Jenna doesn't have the experience to do this either, but she has a really good eye. So for example, when we installed the stream exhibit in Ridges to Rivers, that was my exhibit to plant, but Jenna came in to help, especially with some of the not design, but some of the layout of where's this log going to go? Where's this rock going to go? Where do you want this plant to go? So I can bring in the plants that I think should go in that exhibit, and the rock and whatever else, leaves. Jenna's got a great eye for making them look really good.
Thank you. That was the first exhibit I ever planted, because I had previously worked outside, and I think that was during the winter. So we were short on work. So Austin invited me inside to plant that exhibit. And it was the first time I had my waders on. We were in with I don't know if there were fish in there yet, but
I don't think there were in there yet.
I don't think so.
Because I remember you doing this, but there weren't animals in there yet.
But yeah, that was the first time. So that means a lot for you to say that I did a good job, because it was the first time I did it. So
that is another exhibit that I would consider a real showcase of your work. So I'm glad you brought it up, because when you walk in that exhibit, and that is, if you are familiar with this podcast and have listened to the episode where we talk about the Ridges to Rivers Gallery, and in particular the large stream exhibit, that is the exhibit we are talking about. And if you have not listened to it, please go back and listen to it. Also, please leave us a like and a review. All good things that help the show with the algorithm. Anyway, that exhibit is, like I said, a real showcase of your work. And because we do a lot of work through the Tennessee Aquarium Conservation Institute out in those kinds of locations, and I've gone out with some of the aquarists who collected animals for that particular exhibit, as well as some of the other exhibits in Ridges to Rivers, I gave kudos to Ben and Avery about this, and I will give it to the two of you as well, that I think that is one of the truest recreations of a habitat that I have personally seen in any aquarium. Now, given my obvious bias, that may not count for much, but I think you did a great job.
Well, thank you. And again, an exhibit that I think you won't find anywhere else. A stream exhibit with southern Appalachian fish, darters that are gorgeous, shiners, daces. That's one of my favorite exhibits, and probably my favorite aquatic exhibit in the entire aquarium, because I love the fish and I love the region. But there's always things that could be a little better in there. But I really, really love that exhibit, and it's fun to be able to try to get to recreate nature inside and expose people to that. And that's one of those. I love this region. I love this area, and so it's just nice to get to do that.
So Jenna, we were talking, or Austin mentioned that, or you mentioned maybe that you were outside prior to doing this work. So you used to be over the plaza, so the city park that is all around the aquarium. People sometimes think that is our property. It's not. It's actually a city park. But you were responsible for kind of tending to the gardens and various landscaping that is on the plaza. So what was it like going from transitioning from overseeing something on that scale that was purely outdoors to doing the work that you do now, which is inside the building? And you mentioned how much you love being outside. You're not obviously outside when you're in the aquarium. So what has that transition been like for you?
I thought I would have a harder time because I was outside so much, but I've been doing a lot of work in the Delta. There were a lot of things that need to be planted and stuff.
The Delta would be the second of the living forest galleries in the River Journey building. We have 3 across both buildings, so there being Tropical Cove if that comes up again. So you were in Delta Country Gallery.
And you feel the same in there as you do outside, which, is our goal, but it was hot. I was sweating, like there's mud, and I loved it. Like, I was like, I do feel like I'm outside right now. Like, the sun was coming through, too. So you do have areas like that where you do feel like you're outside still. When it comes to, like, actually doing the work, like what I did this morning with the smaller habitat, like potting that up, I feel like I get to be a lot more detailed with my work, which always it was like an itch I could not scratch outside because it was too big. Like there was too much. There were, other priorities that had to take first place, and they weren't always plant stuff. So, I couldn't be as passionate about it.
Yeah, people love the plaza, and I think you did a really excellent job there as well.
Thank you.
But it's nice to see you doing something that, like you said, is scratching an itch that you've had that wasn't getting scratched.
Right.
So,
and sometimes it would too, but outside poses different challenges than working inside with plants, and each one, it has its pros and cons. So
this may be an impossible question to answer, but I thought I would throw it out anyway, since people are often asking us how many species of animals we have at the aquarium. I think it's about 700. Do you have any idea, guesstimate or otherwise, the number of the species count for plants at the aquarium?
So currently we only keep a list of every plant in the butterfly garden exhibit, and we have to keep a list of those. And I believe it's somewhere between 75 and 100 species in the butterfly garden.
In that one exhibit.
We actually do need to make a list, or at least attempt to.
I love a good inventory.
Yeah. I would estimate it's got to be somewhere close to 500.
I was going to say, is it hundreds?
It's hundreds. I mean, it could be closer to 1,000, but my guess would be at least 500.
Yeah, are we including what's in backup areas?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
over 500.
That feels like a lot.
It is a lot.
It is.
But so to give you some context, the state of Tennessee has almost 3,000 plants, different species that grow within it.
Wow.
Most southern states have roughly 2,700 to 3,000 plant species across the state. So 500, when I did my master's research and I was surveying an entire land trust, I had 700 species over acres, hundreds of acres. So 500 is a good species count
for such a concentrated amount of space.
Absolutely.
And we're including Tropical Cove too, which isn't, plants that are necessarily native to here, but adds on even more probably.
Yeah, I mean, when you're going through the aquarium, like you said, you're trying to recreate habitats that these animals are in, and these animals are literally from all over the world. So it just kind of goes without saying, I think, that not all of them are going to be southeastern species.
And we're trying to keep the plants within these exhibits as accurate to those locations as possible. So absolutely, if we've got animals from Madagascar, we've got plants from Madagascar. If we've got animals from the Gulf Coast of North America, we've got plants from the Gulf Coast. So these plants could be from all over the world.
So that begs the question then, that if your particular specialization, as you have said a couple of times already, and your kind of passion is for southeastern species, how difficult is it then for you to take the knowledge that you have that is specific to southeastern species and apply it to something from like a traveler's palm from Madagascar? That's the only example I can think of because I don't know plants as well as you, or something from, say, Vietnam or Laos or Mongolia, which we don't have in the building, I don't think.
I don't think we do, but absolutely. So my experience and education and knowledge about tropical plants is not as high as it is for native plants. But like I said, I've had my own house plants since I was probably 10 or 12. And have been growing tropical plants and studying them since I was a child. I have a collection of tropical orchids at my house of about 70 or 75. Most of them are small, but it's just a group of plants that have always fascinated me, and I've just grown and or read and studied about them enough to be familiar with them. There's still so many that I'll never be familiar with all of them. But I feel like that experience and interest over the years has really helped me learn how to grow these things. For example, orchids, most tropical orchids are epiphytes. They grow on trees.
That's what that means?
Epiphyte means the plant that grows on a tree. There's epiphytes. Lithophytes are plants that grow on rocks.
On rock, yeah.
So there's orchids that do that as well. And so kind of having an idea of how these grow, how their climate would interact with that, how much rain they would get. It gives you an idea of how to try to grow these in our exhibits. There are other plants. There's cactus that are epiphytes. They're ferns. And so if you go into the tropical cove, you'll see a lot of epiphytes, air plants, bromeliads. These are plants that in a normal tropical environment would typically get inundated with a rainstorm, and then there'd be a lot of air movement, breeze, wind blowing. It would dry them out over a course of a day or two. Then they'd get rained on again. But they don't grow in soil. They don't, so I feel like these are things I'm interested in and have enough experience in to be familiar with them, even if I don't have as much as like the southern Appalachian plants.
Yeah, I'm a pretty firm believer that the more interested you are in whatever it is you're doing, the better a job you're doing. So is that this
big on that?
Is that true for you too then, Jenna? Do you share that passion that for all of horticulture that Austin has, or are you more region specific in your focus?
How many houseplants do you have?
A lot. That's a thing too. Like a lot of plant people have always had plants, even if they weren't good with them. Like you just try, like I remember being little and, my mom would buy like annuals and I would try to bring them in my room and there was not enough light. I probably didn't water them, but I tried.
Yeah, there is the desiccated remains of an orchid that lived in my office for too long, neglected and left without water. It did well against all odds and flowered for much longer than I think nature probably should have allowed it to.
Plants are tougher than people give them credit for. I will say, was it one that was sold as an ice orchid?
I have no.
You give it an ice cube.
I feel like it's there's the cat distribution system where cats will just find their way into your homes. For some reason I became the beneficiary of the orchid distribution system. I have absolutely no idea where that orchid came from. It is gone now. Rest in peace. But I am not a plant person. My wife is, but I'm not.
I'm convinced most of the time when people say they're not a plant person, they're capable. But plants take a certain amount of attention, and I think people who aren't interested, they're not going to pay the attention to notice the signs that the plant is giving them on what they need. And it's not some kind of terrible flaw a person has. It's just not being interested enough to, I'm not going to pay attention to something I'm not as interested in as other things.
And it's not even that I don't like plants. I mean, if I didn't like plants, I would not have invited the two of you onto the Podcast Aquatic. But and so I do. I lack the like you said, the interest in and caring for them. I would rather appreciate them on an aesthetic level or knowing that there was a lot of thought process behind their inclusion in our exhibits that like we've already discussed. I like the intentionality of plant choice at the aquarium. I think that's one of my favorite things about the aquarium.
Yeah, it's not just pothos.
I was thinking about my favorite plant at the aquarium. And I thought about saying pothos, but hear me out. It is so versatile. It will root anywhere.
So, all right. So,
and it stays green.
For people like me who have no idea what pothos is, I thought you were talking about one of the Three Musketeers. What is a pothos?
Some people call it pothos. The genus is Epipremnum, and it's a tropical vine from Southeast Asia, and it is probably the most or one of the most common houseplants. It is almost indestructible. It can dry out somewhat. You could almost not water it for a month and it would potentially make it. You could water it almost every day. You can grow it in water, in tanks. We, in fact, do grow it in water. It can handle almost no light, like artificial light inside of a room and scrape by. It can handle full sun.
So is it a vine?
It is a vine, and it will grow in its natural habitat. It will grow up trees and grow 60, 70 feet tall, and it gets these gigantic leaves that are fenestrated. So they're divided into little divisions like fingers. Houseplants, it normally is a small vine that has a heart-shaped leaf.
Okay. And so what would be a or an exhibit or a gallery in which you would find it at the aquarium?
Lots.
It's in Turtles of the World. It is in quite a few of the aquatic exhibits. So
there used to be a nice one in Mossy Frogs. I think it wasn't getting enough light. Over time,
it's in Rivers of the World. Even in Aquaria, the aquatic tanks with no terrestrial animals it is in Tropical Cove. There's quite a bit in Tropical Cove. It's also in Island Life. It is in one of the Madagascar exhibits in Island Life.
Okay. So Pothos, then that's your choice then for favorite.
I don't know. I might double.
You didn't commit
on
to it. That was clever. She talked around it so she could say it without actually saying it.
I thought about it.
That'd be a bold choice for a plant person.
All right. Well, did you just start is there a plant fight going on that I'm just not
maybe
keyed into? Okay. Well, all right, Austin. What is your favorite plant at the aquarium? Have you given it any thought?
This was really just all a setup so that Jenna could say she had a favorite plant, and I couldn't say that I have. I
want to hear Austin's answer.
So the problem is, it's like picking a favorite child. Like, you can't pick a favorite plant. If I have to say my favorite one to see, the one that makes me the happiest when I see it, there is an orchid in Tropical Cove, and the genus is Psychopsis, and it's called the butterfly orchid a lot of times, the common name. And it sends up this giant, I say giant, it's 3 feet tall flowering stem, and at the very top, there will be this orange and yellow flower that kind of looks like a butterfly with giant antennae sticking up at the top. It's always been my favorite kind of orchid. I love orchids, and it will continue to flower for sometimes a decade. So it will grow a flowering stalk. It will have one flower. When that one's done, it will drop off and it will send another one up. And it will do that for 10 years if you grow it well. And we have one in front of one of the lemur exhibits in Tropical Cove.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think you have my favorite plant. So if I had to choose one, it would be, coming from Knoxville, at the feet of the Smokies. It's hard for me not to choose a rhododendron. I love rhododendron.
But we do have a lot of rhododendron.
I know, but my favorite, so my favorite here is the rhododendron, but my favorite Appalachian plant, I don't think we have on exhibit, which is the mountain laurel.
Aha. I just put mountain laurels in this year.
Did you?
3 of them. They're still small.
Okay.
But they're coming.
Okay. So
they will grow up.
Mountain laurel is definitely my favorite. Whenever we go out in the field, as I said, we often do a lot of work out in our own backyard here in southern Appalachia, and mountain laurel is pretty much all over the place. It's kind of a pain in the butt to get through.
Terrible.
When you're trying to get around, if there's a part of a stream that's difficult to navigate, it's either because there's huge boulders that you have to climb over, or they're a tangled net of laurel tree branches that you have to try and get through.
Those are often called hells. Rhododendron hells.
I thought there was no cussing in the pot.
He can edit it out.
It's a place.
It's a location.
Anyway,
okay.
Laurel, so laurel trees are I guess they have kind of an unfortunate reputation, but if you're trying to move through them, however, to look at them, I think they're beautiful.
They are. They're notoriously difficult to cultivate. So in horticulture circles, they can be really difficult to grow from small plants and to transplant. They grow really well where they grow in nature, but they're notoriously difficult to cultivate in other areas. And so I just bought 3 of them this year and put them into our Appalachian Cove forest. And so far they've done well, and hopefully they will grow into nice sized mountain laurels that you'll be able to see.
Beautiful. I hope so. I hope that's true. So, Jenna, before we move on, do you have a favorite? Have you thought of one, or should I move on?
I can think I don't think I've been inside long enough to really pick through stuff. I feel like a lot of the things I have done are very broad so far. But if you were to ask me outside, I would say the eastern prickly pear cactus, or we have one sweet bay magnolia. And that one is like my child, because when I first started, it had a bunch of dead shrubs all around it. And it was COVID time, so we weren't open. So I wasn't working around like an open time. So, midday, we could have the Kubota out there pulling out anything we wanted. So we pulled out all the dead shrubs, and it kind of revealed this magnolia now that's probably doubled in size, and it's flowering a lot more. So it's very gratifying for me to see the flowers.
What about the native rosemary?
That is also another good one too. I think, what is it called? The Cumberland rosemary, I believe. It smells so good, but I was struggling to find plants to put on top of the archway because it gets so dry.
I was going to say, these are on the archways that if you've been to the aquarium, you know what we're talking about. If you have not, when you come to the aquarium, the city park that surrounds the aquarium, the plaza, as we've talked about earlier, has a series of archways. How many of them are there? 2, 3? 3. Anyway, so the eastern prickly pear that you mentioned?
That's up there too. There's yucca, Cumberland rosemary. What else do we put up there? Just like some black-eyed Susans, echinacea. Yeah.
So you have to go up. So to see the animals, the plants you're talking about, you have to go up and over the archways, which is not. I mean, that's not like a great task, and actually get a kind of a cool view of the aquarium when you do that. So
and of the city.
Definitely climb up it. So is there a species of plant not on display that you would love to get that maybe is either, as you mentioned, Austin, difficult to cultivate, or that is difficult to source, or some other reason why we don't have it, but you would love to someday feature it?
I'm sure that there is a long list. One that pops into my head because I was just watching a video of it is a Victoria lily. It's like a type of water lily. It's the type that makes gigantic leaves, and they're large enough that people can actually sit on them and they will support their weight. And I was just watching videos of different botanical gardens and zoos that grow them and then have a competition to see whose leaves can hold the most weight before sinking. And it just seemed like such a fun thing. They require a really hot environment, lots of sun, and lots of open water. And we don't necessarily have, even though we're an aquarium, we don't have a great habitat for that. All of these places are outdoors. And so they have a better location, but it's just a super cool plant. I know we've tried a couple of times to grow them, and it's just trickier indoors.
I was going to say, I think your predecessor, Charlene, who used to have the role that you currently have, tried a couple of times with Victoria lilies.
Absolutely. And it's just trickier indoors.
Jenna, any species of plant that you would particularly love to have see at the aquarium that maybe you haven't had a chance to introduce, or that is hard to get around, or hard to get or to grow?
Not that I can really think of right now. The only thing on my mind is that bird's nest fern that's variegated. I've never seen one of those before, but I'd love to get that out on exhibit for people to see.
All right, so let's begin to wrap this up, but I want to talk a little bit more about the ways that your respective roles directly overlap with animal care, because I liken the work that you do, and you kind of, I think, have even done so yourself, to being set dressers for the aquarium. So I refer to you as under-celebrated. I think that's because, as you mentioned, Jenna, if you're doing your job right, like, people don't really pay much attention to it. But I think if you weren't doing this job and we didn't have the amount of live vegetation we have, you would miss it. Once you've seen it, it's hard to go somewhere that doesn't have it, because it kind of sticks out. But along with all that live vegetation comes inherent interactions with the animals. So I know that your jobs do actually overlap with animal care. So talk about the relationship that you have and the interactions you have with the animal care specialist here, and how those discussions go about what you're allowed to introduce or what they ask you to introduce into exhibits for the animals' well-being.
So we just, as Jenna mentioned earlier, have been planting a lot in our delta where we have alligators. So we were in with alligators this morning, and we've got to be careful about what we bring in, and also try to be mindful that we're planting things in an exhibit with 4.5, 5 foot long alligators that are going to walk on the land where these plants are and knock them over.
And be very curious about what you're doing at all times.
They're going to be very curious about us. And so we're interacting with them the entire time. And we have one of the alligator keepers back there with us. But even things like mulch and leaves that we're bringing into top dress with, the alligators are going to walk through these beds and drag that into the water. But at the same time, it's providing a place for them to come onto the land that's natural. When we were in there last week planting these plants, there was an alligator that kept popping up into the bed and just nosing around through the plants, exploring. It was just new and it was curious. And so that, that to me, that's probably a natural process. This alligator would experience that. Even more so than, or differently than that, but still the same kind of thing. I mean, we're growing food for these animals as well. So we're not just providing habitat that is healthy and safe for them, but we're growing greens for animals to eat, turtles and lemurs and other animals. We're growing trees and bananas that the lemurs can browse on or eat.
The pacu in flooded Amazon are a great example of an unexpected beneficiary of the work that you do.
Absolutely. I think about that a lot because we grew a lot of tomatoes.
I was afraid you would say tomatoes because I feel like I've probably eaten more of them than the animals.
Well, so just like people, it seems like a lot of the animals go through phases where they seem to like certain things and then get tired of them. And so we were growing tomatoes and peppers for turtles, and then we'll kind of rotate through what they eat. And the turtles weren't eating the tomatoes as much, but the pacus will apparently eat almost anything, any vegetation.
So pacu are, I am not a fish scientist, as has been firmly established in the course of this podcast. I have no expertise when it comes to animals, so I can't tell you genus. All I know is that they are in our flooded Amazon exhibit, which is the last one you see in River Journey as you're leaving the building. So look in there for these giant fish. They've got mouths that are kind of surprisingly small for their body, but they, as you mentioned, are basically like little aquatic garbage disposals.
They look to me like a gigantic piranha, but minus the gigantic sharp teeth.
I almost made the leap that I think they are related to piranha because I think I've heard that, but I cannot remember to commit to it.
I've heard the same thing. But then again, I'm thinking about these tomatoes, and a few weeks ago, I see one of the lemur keepers taking a whole bowl of tomatoes over to the lemurs. And I didn't realize the lemurs would eat them. And so we can grow tomatoes for all kinds of animals. So we're growing these. We know where they're grown. We know how they're grown. And it's fresh produce for these animals. And
that whole project kind of was one of those kind of low-hanging fruit ideas where I'm a little surprised that no one said, why don't we do this? Like a long time ago. Because if you look at the aquarium, the thing that is most iconic about the Tennessee Aquarium, we have a very distinctive silhouette, and that is partly because of the glass enclosed triangular peaks or pyramidal peaks over the buildings. And under those peaks, so they let in all the light that we've talked about in the Appalachian Cove Forest and the Delta Country Gallery. So those living forest galleries have lots of natural light coming in. But there are also exhibits or spaces that are not on the exhibit path where some of the animals are kept. So some of our turtles are kept up under those peaks. And they're basically just greenhouse. That's a natural, or not a natural greenhouse. It is a de facto greenhouse.
Absolutely.
And so you're growing some of those plants there.
We've historically grown just additional plants if we need some to bring into exhibit, or we're propagating some. And we were growing some plants, some food plants, some browse plants for lemurs, tamarind trees, bananas, dragon fruit, some other plants that some of these animals could eat, but not at the scale we've kind of scaled up to at this point with greens and tomatoes and occasionally peppers.
Yeah, it's fun to see you all walking into exhibits with bags of fresh cut kale or
turf.
Yeah, yes, exactly.
Or turf. We can sprout these trays of grass or other seeds, and they make a nice turf that we can then take onto exhibit with turtles or lemurs, and they can rub on it, they can chew on it, they can do whatever they want to with it.
Walk on it.
Yeah.
It's neat to see how they interact with it, because as you said, the alligator nosing through the plants made me think immediately of the turf you're talking about, where it's basically just pure enrichment. It's something that we do, enrichment being a very important part of the animal's daily routine, giving them some sort of sensory stimulation. That was one of the more interesting examples of enrichment that I think I've come across in my time at the aquarium, seeing them react to these trays of homegrown turf.
Yeah, it worked really well. It was really incredible with the tortoises in the lemur exhibit in Tropical Cove, and the lemurs themselves as well.
So you do so long story short, you play a more important role than might be immediately assumed in the care for the animals, that I think is kind of under celebrated. So I'm glad that we had a chance to bring the two of you on to talk about the important work that you do. Now, before I let you go, because I do think it's probably time to wrap up the episode, I want to ask, at your homes, is it kind of like plumbers with leaky pipes in their own homes? Do you not have a garden of your own to tend to, because you figure you work enough with plants here? Or do you actually have gardens at your houses?
You want me to go first?
Sure.
I kind of lean more towards, I do this all day. I don't want to come home and do it more. But, there is a passion with that where I do like having plants. So I have quite a bit of house plants. And I had my one of my coworkers actually came and tilled up a spot in my backyard that last year I grew a vegetable garden. This year I grew a flower garden. It has a lot of weeds in it, but it's doing all right. So it's a balance. So I feel like I'll do more now that I'm in an inside position that might not be as laborious as having worked outside all summer. So I'm hoping to do more at my house.
You'll have more energy to spare.
Hopefully.
Austin.
I absolutely have gardens and plants everywhere. I probably have just under 100 houseplants. Some of those go outside in the summertime. And so I probably spend 2 to 3 hours a week trying to keep up with those. I've got a vegetable garden that I've had since I bought the house. And I try to keep up with that. There are times in the summer when it's really dry where that's hot, but vegetables kind of year round. And then I've got a few native plant flower beds that I keep up with, but it's as low maintenance as I can do it.
When you were a landscaper, because I know that you had worked outside previously, did you find it was harder to go home and keep on working?
During the summer,
pretty much.
It is. When it's so hot. And
I can barely bring myself to water sometimes. Like, I have to take off my shoes and get like my feet wet while I do it because I'm sweating.
Yeah. There are definitely days where the garden needs to be watered.
Right.
And I just can't bring myself to do it.
Okay, I'm glad I'm not alone
You're
in
not.
that. So,
because we do this every day, every work day, and we love plants, but
yeah, I think as a plant person, I kill more plants than I do the average person because we're working with more.
That's a prerequisite for being a plant person.
You have to kill it.
I've killed way more orchids than I've kept alive. But
maybe I'm on my way to becoming a plant person.
Well,
that's how you do it. You mess up.
I got a kill count of 1.
That's how you learn, I think, how to grow plants. And if one doesn't die, you're doing something right. Take it.
That's a good analogy for life too.
Well, that orchid actually had a very testy handwritten note on it one day when I came back to my office from our former lead horticulturist, Christine, was here from the beginning of the aquarium until just a few years ago, and she came to drop off something in my office and apparently saw this poor orchid and wrote I saw a handwritten stick-it note on the side of the vase saying, "This orchid needs less water." So I was apparently watering it too much, apparently.
Okay.
Anyway, and we have probably talked too much on this episode of the Podcast Aquatic. It is time for us to wrap things up. But I would like to extend my thanks to both of you, Jenna Paler and Austin Prater, for coming in and talking plants with us for the last hour or so and giving some people insights into an element of the aquarium experience that maybe they've not paid attention to, but the next time they come for a visit, hopefully they will train their eyes on the plants and the flowers and give you all a tip of the hat the next time they see you.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, thank you, Casey.
If you have an idea for a future episode of the Podcast Aquatic or a question for an aquarium expert like Austin or Jenna, type it up pat it on the back, and send it on to podcast@tnaqua.org. And in the meantime, keep listening, and as always, remember, every drop matters.